Thank you very much, Lisa, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Walt, for hosting me, and for the Koplar family for showing me around this incredible facility, one of 5 facilities, well, actually, and more facilities across Ontario and beyond. I also want to acknowledge, as Walt did, Keenan and your great work, and Ron Bedard from Dofasco, the backbone of the Canadian steel industry, the North American steel industry, and part of the global industry. Our country was built by steel workers such as those joining us here today, or I'm joining them rather. North America was built by workers like that. The world is built by workers like that. And it is entirely right that we're here with so many members of the government caucus joining for an important series of announcements. Yes, to get to where we need to go, we need to overcome some immediate challenges. In recent years, the global steel industry has been undergoing a fundamental shift. Shifts driven by many factors, but I'm going to point out particularly foreign competition that unfairly benefits from non-market policies and practices. And now, the trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chains. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments. It's because we are highly exposed to this fundamental restructuring that's happening in the global steel industry. We have substantial steel exports. We have very high per capita steel use. And we have a disproportionately open import market. In fact, we have one of the most open steel markets in the world. Imports supply almost 2/3 of current Canadian consumption of steel, compared to less than 1/3 for the United States and less than 1/6 for the European Union. And over time, we become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border. So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects. And those shifts start today. In an increasingly unpredictable and unreliable world, we must focus on what we can control. Canada has what the world needs. We're becoming an energy superpower, and we are a leader in the building blocks of a modern economy. From high value-added steel, to aluminum, to critical minerals, and artificial intelligence. And Canadians have just given governments the mandate to build big things, nation-building projects that will transform our economy. We have the potential to become our own best customer for steel, but we will lose that ability if we don't manage the profound transformation now underway in the industry. And to do that, we have to change the way we do things so we can better support our companies and our workers during this time of change. And that's why I'm proud to announce today that Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions. Informed by the review of our steel trade arrangements that we announced last month, the following changes to tariff rate quotas will take effect by the end of this month. For steel products from non-free trade agreement countries, we will tighten the tariff rate quota level to 50% of 2024 volumes and apply a 50% tariff on any imports beyond those levels. For steel products from partners with free trade agreements, we will introduce a tariff rate quota level for steel products at 100% of 2024 volumes and apply the same 50% tariffs on imports above those levels. The government is reviewing its remission framework to favor the use of Canadian steel and aluminum in Canadian-made products. And we will also implement additional tariffs on steel imports from all non-U.S. countries containing steel melted and poured in China. Our existing arrangements with our CUSMA partners will remain the same, including no changes to our current trade measures with the United States. The combination of all these measures will ensure that Canadian steel producers have a bigger share of the Canadian market. It will create more resilient supply chains and unlock private capital for Canadian production. But given the dynamics in global trade, we will reassess all of our existing trade arrangements with respect to steel, consistent with the progress made in our bilateral discussions with the United States, and will also take into account the steel negotiations that the U.S. is currently undertaking with other countries, because what happens in those will affect what happens here. Second, we will invest in Canadian steel companies and, above all, in Canadian steel workers. Building on previously announced enhancements to employment insurance and the EI work-sharing program, the Government of Canada will invest $70 million in labour market development agreements to provide training and income support for up to 10,000 affected steel workers. Through reskilling investments and increased worker supports, we will ensure workers have the skills and the support that they need to meet the future needs of this industry. To build a more resilient and diversified steel industry that serves the needs of a growing Canada, the government will provide $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund to help Canadian steel companies advance projects that will increase their competitiveness, that will catalyze their production of steel products that are not currently produced in Canada, and to create jobs to serve growing sectors of our economy, including in defence. The Business Development Bank of Canada's Pivot to Grow initiative is also being enhanced to provide support to eligible small and medium-sized steel enterprises that face liquidity challenges. And $150 million of the government's Regional Tariff Response Initiative through its regional development agencies will be prioritized for the steel industries. And finally, the large enterprise tariff loan program that was introduced at the start of this year will be updated in several ways. We'll expand eligibility and provide lower cost financing to firms in the steel industry. These changes will include reducing the minimum annual revenue requirements of borrowers from $300 million to $150 million, reducing the minimum loan size from $60 million to $30 million, extending the loan maturities from 5 to 7 years, reducing the initial interest rate, all while requiring companies to retain and reinvest in their workers. Through this series of measures, we'll help ensure that Canadian steel companies have the capital and the workers and the time to build the skills, the tools, the facilities to serve a growing Canada. Now, we will also prioritize using Canadian steel to build the big projects that we're undertaking, including millions of new homes, new ports, bridges, energy infrastructure, and investments in our security and defense capabilities. As we deliver on our mandate to build big things faster, we will ensure that Canadian steel and other Canadian materials are prioritized in that construction. And to that end, we will change the federal government's procurement process to require companies contracting with the federal government to source Canadian steel for government contracts. I see we didn't have to do that for Walter's group, who did it directly when in their service of Parliament and many other, and the museums across this great nation. To conclude, Canada's steel sector has a history of reinventing itself and reinvesting in itself at critical moments. After the Second World War, Canada built homes, factories, infrastructure at rates never seen before. And to meet that demand, the Canadian steel industry modernized rapidly and increased output substantially. Now we must pivot again. For Canada to build big things fast, we need our steel industry to advance, not retreat. Nous avons besoin d'une main-d'œuvre forte et qualifiée et un marché équitable et compétitif au Canada. C'est ce que nous faisons en tant que pays à grande échelle. L'industrie canadienne de l'acier sera toujours au cœur de notre compétitivité, de notre sécurité et de notre force. Et c'est pourquoi, afin de bâtir un Canada fort, ça commence par les investissements dans des industries clés comme celle-ci. At this hinge moment in our history, Canada is shifting from reliance to resilience. We're giving ourselves far more than any foreign government can ever take away. We're building one Canadian economy out of 13. We're embarking on a series of nation-building projects. We are undertaking unprecedented investments in our defense and security, and we are diversifying our trading relationships. We're building with Canadian workers, using Canadian steel for a Canada strong. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Matt Mead with Canadian Press. You told Canadians that you would be elbows up, and they appear to have largely given you a mandate to get a good deal from the president. But thus far, we have not seen that Canada has gotten basically nothing. And Canada also had to give one of its bargaining chips when it comes to the digital services tax, something other countries like the UK did not give up in their deal with the US. How do you still convince Canadians that you are really elbows up?
Well, look, we are in the midst of long now and tough negotiations with the United States. And we're working for the best deal for Canada. We have put in place a series of retaliatory measures, including in the steel sector. We have secured tariff-free access for a number of Canadian goods. In fact, the percentages are very high in terms of outside of the most affected sectors, steel being one of them, autos, aluminum, forest products. The vast majority of Canadian goods and services are tariff-free. That is not the case for most other countries. We will continue to work constructively for a deal, but it has to be a deal that works for Canadians and Canadian workers. And part of the reason why we don't have a deal is that deal is not yet on the table.
Next question. Samantha Beatty from CBC News. Is a trade deal with the U.S. likely to include some level of tariffs? And if so, will Canada impose tariffs on the U.S. as well?
Well, we'll see what the final agreement is. If there is an agreement, we're working towards an agreement in a constructive manner. And obviously, it's an agreement. There are both sides, and things will be structured accordingly. I think what's important, if I can bring it back to the situation here in the steel sector, is that the U.S. trade deals with other countries, and also the case when the U.S. doesn't have a trade deal with other countries, are going to involve very high tariffs. And one of the consequences of those very high tariffs is it pushes product steel, in this case, and their derivatives, into a Canadian market that has historically been quite open. So it's important that we protect our market from those secondary effects, if you will, from the U.S. Negotiations.
But is Canada willing to impose tariffs? Is that something on the table?
Well, Canada has imposed tariffs.
What more?
Well, on verra. We'll see. I mean, look, it's a negotiation. We want to. We believe in. We believe in free trade. We believe that the best arrangements would be low tariffs. It's proven. You look at the Walters Group and the amazing work they do south of the border for some of the iconic buildings and in the United States. There actually isn't time to list them all, but many of which I know. And that's good for the U.S., it's good for Canada. Now, the U.S. has different priorities and has had different emphasis, and we have to adjust to that.
Girep Çakır, Turkish Voice of Canada. Steel trade tensions with the U.S. are not just geopolitical. They affect real working families, many of whom are immigrants. How is your government ensuring not just the protection of Canada's steel industry, but also stability of the immigrant and newcomer workforce that plays a critical, often invisible role in sustaining this sector? That immigrant workforce who face both job precarity and systemic barriers to upward mobility, especially in communities where they are the backbone of production and logistics.
Well, first off, thank you for your question. We are behind all workers and all citizens of Canada, to be absolutely clear, and that's why we're fighting hard in these trade negotiations. But it's also why a centerpiece of what we're announcing today for the steel sector is directly focused on workers. That's $70 million to help with retraining, upskilling, income support. Taking a step back from that, the investments that we're supporting through what's called this Strategic Innovation Fund, the $1 billion for the industry to build up new lines of work for markets that are going to grow here in Canada, it's good for the companies, but it's good for the workers and providing that sustain. So we're very focused. I'll say one last thing, which is that we also have been from the start ensuring that the revenues we collect from tariffs, the counter tariffs that we've had to put in place, that those go back to the workers and go back to support those workers for precisely the reasons that you say in your question. Thank you.
Hi, Prime Minister. Laura Stone, Globe and Mail.
Yeah.
BC Premier David Eby says that Canada has been talking to the provinces about a softwood lumber deal with the U.S. that could remove this irritant from the table. He said this could include quotas for how much wood is shipped from Canada. Do you see a potential to strike a softwood deal and settle this matter for the time being, and what role would quotas play?
Well, thanks for the question. We're in close contact. I'm in close contact with Premier Eby on this and many other issues, but this is one of the biggest, without question. There is decades and decades of trade history, as you know, with respect to softwood lumber, U.S. trade actions there. There is normally some element of managed trade that comes out of any agreement that comes there. Can include quotas, can include a variety of trade factors, if I can put it that way. So that is a top priority. And we would like to resolve it at the same time as other trade issues with the United States. It is running on a slightly different timetable. Their timetable is different. It's a historic 232 action, if you probably know. And we'd like to bring it together and have it as part of a global agreement if we can, and that's certainly been the position of the Government of Canada. Thank you. Please.
Hi there, Fallon Hewitt from the Hamilton Spectator. I had a question. So you've spoken about the supports for steelworkers, but the impacts of tariffs stretch far beyond those companies. How will your government support cities like Hamilton that are home to thousands of steelworkers with the impact stretching far beyond just those workers, but businesses all across the city?
Great question. And the first thing in answer to that, because your question goes to the heart of the overall issue and the economic strategy. And the first thing to recognize is they call this is steel town for a reason. It's at the heart. It's the heart of the industries and associated industries that have been built there. It's at the heart. Steel's at the heart of the community. Strength. Make steel our strength as people. Where's Ron? He's right there. Yeah. It's right there at the core of the community, but also the core of your question, the economic impacts of having a strong steel industry, a strong industrial base in Hamilton. So the first thing you do is you make, and particularly at a time when Canada is going to need a lot more steel because we're going to build this country. I give you a report. We're going to need a lot more steel because we're going to build this country. And what we need to do is help the industry transition. To help more broadly, not just help, this isn't help, this is us helping ourselves as Hamiltonians, as Ontarians, as Canadians, is to build. We need more homes in Hamilton and this region. We can improve the port infrastructure. It's already the busiest port on the Great Lakes, but we can improve the port infrastructure. We can reinforce our energy infrastructure through some of the specialist steel that is produced here. So those nation-building projects, those are going to have an enormous multiplier effect across the country and back into the core of those sectors, and then, which is steel, and then out in the region as a consequence of that strength. What we can't let happen, what we won't let happen, is that the current trade situation with the United States and unfair trade practices in other countries, the combination of those guts our steel industry today, and then a few years down the road, we need our steel industry strong. We're not going to let that happen. We're going to do the transition, and this is what's there. I'll take the last question, if I may.